Alright guys, in today's video we're going to be working on a 2000 Toyota Camry CE. It's got the 4-cylinder 5S-FE engine, and we're going to be doing the timing belt maintenance. This is a regularly scheduled maintenance item. If we take a look at the scheduled maintenance guide that you should have with your owner's manual kit, like in this version for the 2000, and we open it up, what we find here is every 90,000 miles or 72 months, one of the things that should be replaced is the timing belt. That's true for all of these models listed. Now when this is done by the dealers and using genuine parts, there's usually a sticker. If we come over here on the top of this cover here, we can see there is a sticker from the last time the dealer did it. And it was done last, looks like in December 9th of 2015 at 124,956 miles. The vehicle's currently got 221,130 miles, so it's way overdue. This is 96,000 miles later, so it's a little bit past when it should have been done at 90,000. So we're going to knock that out today. We're going to be following the service manual procedure for Toyota. So we're not going to replace anything unless the manual tells us to replace it. So we're not messing with the water pump. We're not messing with anything else except what needs to be replaced. So we will be inspecting the other belts, like the drive belt here for the alternator and the air conditioning compressor. If that needs to be replaced, it'll be replaced with genuine Toyota parts. We'll be replacing the timing belt with a genuine Toyota part. We'll be inspecting this motor mount here. If that needs to be replaced or not, they'll be changed. And then also there's a belt we can't see in this view that drives the power steering pump. That'll also be inspected. So let's go ahead and get started with the disassembly so we can gain access to the timing belt. Alright guys, let's take a look at the service manual for the procedure we're going to do. This is the 2000 Toyota Camry manual. Each model has its own manual. This is the book version. There's also an online version. So if we take a look at the timing belt section here and we kind of zoom in a little bit, we can see some of the same components that we saw. We can see there's the drive belt for the generator slash alternator, also for the AC compressor. Here's that top motor mount that they call an engine moving control rod in Toyota jargon, and an engine mounting bracket that it attaches to. So that's some of the stuff that we can see. Here's a view of the power steering drive belt that you'll see underneath, and then this front fender apron seal. This is a piece of plastic that we're going to have to be removing after we take off the wheel on the passenger side to give us access to the crankshaft pulley. If we come over on the next page, we can see some more detail. Right, here's the, they call it a generator. I call it an alternator, right? This is what you're going to have to be removing here with the components there. The timing belt's actually inside. Here's some of the componentry that's on the engine when we get these two covers off. Here's the crankshaft pulley. What we're looking for on here is any notations about parts that have to be replaced, as well as notations about torque values when we go to do reassembly. So this is where we'll get all of our torque values, both in Newton meters, which is the first number, and foot pounds, which is the last number, or if it's small enough, inch pounds. This part here says replace only if it's damaged with the star 1. They're referring to these gaskets that we're going to see that sit behind these plastic covers. So we do not normally replace these gaskets unless they're cracked, broken, or missing. Otherwise they get reused. They're not meant to keep oil or anything in there. They're meant to keep dust and debris out so they can be reused. Here they're talking about a part that's only used with a special service tool. We're not going to be using a unique tool from the manual for this, but we will need to have one special tool to remove the crankshaft pulley. I'll show you that when we get to it. So here's our procedure. We're first going to remove the generator, then the right-hand front wheel, then the right-hand front fender apron seal that I showed you earlier. Then we're going to remove the power steering drive belt. We're going to disconnect the ground strap connectors, and when they talk about that, they're only referring to these little connectors that are here above that mount. And I'll show you those as we get to them. Then we're going to remove the engine moving control rod. We're going to remove the number 2 right-hand mounting bracket. Now they tell you about removing the spark plugs. You're not going to need to remove the spark plugs. We're going to disconnect the battery. So that's what we're going to do instead of this step. And then we're going to do the number 2 timing belt cover, which is this top piece. There's a lot of stuff in between here, right? There's going to be some wire clamps that they show with the arrows here. And then we got the bolts themselves that we're going to have to pull off in order to get this off. After we get that cover off, we're going to rotate the engine and get it at top dead center. And I'll show you this close up, but there's marks both on the pulley and on the engine itself to get this lined up. And then we're going to check that there's a small hole in the crankshaft timing pulley. So this is the crankshaft. This is the camshaft. The camshaft timing pulley has a small hole. We're going to make sure there's a little notch showing through that so that everything's lined up. So crankshaft's lined up, camshaft's lined up. Once we do that, we can pull this off. And the way we get this pulley, this timing belt off the pulley, is we're going to loosen this bolt here. There's a spring-loaded tensioner here. We're going to use a pry tool, and we're going to get some tension released on this so that we can get the belt removed. Now, there's going to be steps in the service manual that don't apply to this maintenance. If for some reason you needed to know how to do other things, they're going to tell you how to do it. So they tell you how, for example, to remove this pulley. We do not need to do that for this maintenance. We're going to skip that. We will need to remove the crankshaft pulley, and so we will use a special tool for that, although not the one shown here in the manual. There's a bunch of hints if you happen to be reusing the belt. We're not reusing the belt because we're replacing it because we're doing maintenance. So we're going to skip over all that, but I'll leave it here. You can read and pause the video if that applies to what you're using this video for. After they get past the belt reuse section, they continue on with the information about removing the pulley. Once the pulley is removed, and again, you want to make sure that you use a puller like this or similar because you don't want to have it move and get out of time. Once you take it off, then we'll be able to remove the lower number 1 timing belt covers. Number 2 is on top, number 1's on the bottom. Again, the arrows point to the fasteners and or various electrical plastic connectors that have to be removed. Once that's done, the timing belt guide, which is a small washer looking thing that's going to be down here behind this cover, once that's off, we can actually take the belt off. After we get the belt off, we're going to be removing the idler pulley and tension spring here. The only reason we're removing these is we're going to inspect them to see if they need to be replaced. We're not going to be touching the crankshaft timing pulley. This is, again, another step that's just in here in case the repair requires it. Nor are we going to remove the oil pump pulley. Again, these are just steps in the manual. All these steps are just in here for complete disassembly. I'm only going to show you the steps you need to do for the maintenance of the timing belt replacement. After everything's apart, then we do inspection. Now, if we didn't have scheduled maintenance, there's a bunch of inspections you can do here. Because we're way past the scheduled maintenance, we don't have to bother with this. The belt needs to be replaced because that's what the manufacturer says. But we will be inspecting these idler pulleys. We'll be checking the seals. If the seals are leaking or damaged, then we'll have to replace these. If they're not damaged, you don't have to replace them. It's better to put the OEM parts back on than put anything that's non-OEM. We'll be checking the OEM spring, the free length check. As long as it passes this test, you reuse that spring. You don't replace it. After that, there'll be the installation section. So we'll come back to that later, and we'll go over this again later in the video. Right now, we're just going to focus on disassembly and inspections. Let's go ahead and start working through the steps that we outlined here. And the first step being, when we first started over here, we're going to start with these steps here: generator, front wheel, and fender apron. And then we're going to take care of this drive belt here, the engine control rod and the mounting bracket, and the top cover. All right, let's start with removing the generator assembly, right? So before we can touch any of this, we're going to de-energize everything. We're going to come over here to the battery. We're going to take a 10 millimeter, and we're going to loosen up the negative terminal. Take this guy off, get him out of the way, and now we can go over and remove the alternator. All right, this area here, what we're going to do first is disconnect everything. So there's a little clip here we can just pull up on, get this to come off. You want to be gentle with all this stuff because it's all old plastic. Pull this boot off, and then we're going to give this connector a pinch on the bottom and top. Wiggle that off, right? It's just this little guy here. Okay, with that out of the way, I'm going to take this guy, work him off. Now this one here is broken. Yours might not be. These old plastic pieces can break. What it normally is held on by is there's a tab here and here, here and here. But you just lift up on that. Normally it's got enough flex to it to come off like it just did here without breaking. This one obviously broke at some point in the past. We really should add this to our part replace list. The next thing we're going to go do is we're going to grab what I think is another 10. Yep. Loosen this power feed nut. Take this off, put the nut back on so it doesn't get lost. We can set this guy aside over here. All right. Now we're going to need a 12 millimeter for this bolt and a 14 for this long bolt over here. So at the 12, what we're going to do first is we're going to loosen this part of the tension system. And then we're going to loosen that 14 as well for the same thing. This is the pivot bolt for the tension system. And then this one here, this other 12, when we loosen this, it should let the generator move. So that we can get this guy loosened up. There he goes. Now you may have to give him some persuasion if he's been on here for a while. Gentle taps, make sure he's moving. And we can keep working down through the travel here. We just got to keep doing this until we get enough to where we can get the belt off. Almost. All right. Now with the belt off and out of the way, you can pull it off of the pulley on the air conditioning compressor and the crankshaft pulley and fish it out. So we can take a look at this guy. We can see he's got lots of little cracks in him. So this is another part that we're going to want to add to the replace list. All right, let's finish removing the generator. We're going to go ahead and pull this 14 bolt, and we're going to pull this bolt all the way out. So first I'm going to remove this bottom portion. By hand. All right, so this bolt here, set that where you don't lose it. We can leave this guy in here. Now we're going to take this 14 all the way out. This is a really long bolt. At some point, though, you'll be able to turn it by hand. All right, so let's put this guy where you won't lose it as well. A small pry bar. And you can take the generator out. All right, guys, these 21mm lug nuts need to come off so we can get this passenger side front wheel off. We're just going to set this underneath the front here. And what we're after is this little apron they're talking about. Let's see if we can get some light in here for you guys. There's two 10mm fasteners that are securing it. Here and here. Probably better just to take it out by hand because you don't really have a lot of room to move the ratchet wrench. Or you can use an electric, which I've got laying out here, but I don't bother to use because it makes too much noise. All right, take these two guys, we'll set them right on the tire. So now there's our crankshaft pulley. There's our belt going to our power steering. So now what we're going to do is reposition the camera, and we're going to go after this belt, so we're going to loosen up the bolts that hold the power steering pump. All right, guys, with that apron out of the way, we can see the bottom of the power steering pump and this adjustment screw. It's a 12 millimeter. This is what we're after first. There's a pivot bolt above it that we'll get second. We're going to come in here with a deep socket 12 millimeter, an extension, and a breaker bar. Come up, might block your view for just a moment until I get situated. We're going to come up over the belt like that. Let's see if we can break the torque on this guy. Oh man, that's on there. Nope. Gonna have to get some more leverage. Let me get a different tool that'll go on my breaker bar and give me some more leverage. All right, that got it. So what I'm doing, guys, get this out of here. I'll show you what I got set up here. Taking our 3/8 breaker bar, and I'm putting one of these extensions on it. Just gives you some more leverage on the tool. With that broke, we can just switch back to our regular ratchet and loosen this guy up. Or with that loosened up, we could also pop an electric in here. You don't want to take this bolt off. You just want to loosen it up. Stick my finger back here to make sure that I'm not taking it off all the way. So that's loose enough now. If I can spin that washer by hand, we're done with that. Now we're going to have to come in from a different angle and get the pivot bolt. All right, I'm going to show you that 12 millimeter pivot nut on the power steering pump. We're going to come in here from the passenger side past the strut, right where you see the flashlight. We're going to get into position. Probably won't focus clearly because of all the stuff in the front, but we'll get in the best shot, and then let me show you the position of the bolt and the ratchet coming in. All right, this is a view from the top coming in on that bolt. I'm going to come in from the bottom here. Going to get a 12 millimeter socket on a 1/4 inch ratchet on this guy. And then I'm going to be using an extension on this as well to get some more leverage. That guy's going. And we don't need to remove this guy, we just need to loosen him up. It's a real pisser to get at. But this kind of setup I'm using right now works fine. All right, that feels loose enough. Let me get my gear out of here, I'll show you what I had to do this step. All right, so if we come out with the camera, all right, just 1/4 inch ratchet with a 12 millimeter shorty socket, and then we stuck a 14 on here with another extension so we get some more leverage to crack that torque. All right, with all of that out now, we've got a lot of slack on the belt because it moved a little bit, but we need to move it some more. Our flashlight just took a dump on us, but it's enough to get this off. All right, and then just like the other belt, you can see there's some cracking in between these V's. Not as bad as the generator compressor belt was, but still enough to warrant replacement. There's a better view right from the side here. So whenever you start getting these little cracks, it's time to replace the belt. All right, next thing in the service manual is this mount setup here. And at the same time, we'll go ahead and do these ground connections. So to keep track of which one's which, because they're the same kind of connection, I'm just going to take some painter's tape. I'm going to mark this one, and I'll leave the other one unmarked. That'll let us know which one this is. Just going to come up here and raise this up. You can see there's like a little latch set up here, right? Key is to let it come up without breaking it. There we go. All right, there's one. And then we'll get the other one when we get this out of the way. But if we pull the camera over this way, the other one's right there. Right there. We'll get him second. All right, so that one's out of the way. We'll go ahead and grab our flashlight. And we'll grab a 14. We're going to loosen up the bracket mounts first. And then we'll take the top mount. And then we'll take our extension off, and we'll get this inside mount that we don't have as much clearance on. With that out of the way, we can take off the bolts. They're different sizes, so you're going to want to keep track of them. So there's one. This one goes into a captive nut that's on the other side of the bracket. So you don't need to have any kind of tools to hold the other side. So I'm going to get this to a point where you can turn it by hand. This one also has a washer on it that you also want to keep track of. So this is the longer one, and then the one that goes by the strut mount is the shorter one. This is another thing that we're going to want to inspect. And we can see in here there's a lot of cracking on this rubber bushing that's inside of here. So this is another part that's going to need to be replaced. All right, let's go ahead and finish with this mounting bracket. Go back and put our extension back in. Again, we're just going to loosen this up enough so we can turn it by hand. And with these guys loosened up, we can remove the mounting bracket for this control rod. Underneath it is going to be another bracket that this mounts to. That's the next thing we have to pull after we undo this other ground wire. All right, so this guy's out of the way. We'll get some more slack on this wire, and then we're going to need to disconnect him as well. As soon as we can grab our little tool to help us. There we go. All right, and again, you just want to make sure, get the light here, right? There's like a little pyramid-shaped latch. You want to make sure that's present because that hooks onto the other one that's on the inside of the tab. So those are good, nothing to replace there. Tuck these under the power steering hose to get them out of the way. Tuck this back here. Okay, next we're going to have to go after this guy. There's one bolt here, and there's two that we'll have to go fish out from below. So we'll go ahead and loosen this guy first, and then we'll go below and get the other two, and then we'll be able to remove this bracket. And again, this is a 14. Now this power steering hose is actually in our way here. So I'm going to see if we have any other options here. We might have to use a box end wrench. Go ahead and switch to that. We'll get this guy loosened up. All right. This is about the only tool that'll fit in here. break the torque on that, and now let's go below and get the other two. I'm going to show you with a mirror here where these two bolts are. We got a flashlight propped in there. One's well lit. It's kind of towards the upper part of your view, and the one that's more dimly lit towards the bottom part of your view. Those are the two 14s you got to get access to. So we're going to get in there with a ratchet wrench and take those two out as well. All right. You don't have a lot of clearance in here, so this is one of those ones that requires patience, but you get to a point where it's not ratcheting anymore, then we'll be able to take this off and just turn it with our hand. Just like that. You'll still need to use the socket just to have a better grip, but you can turn it by hand like I'm doing right now. We're getting the one that's closer to the firewall first here. At some point. Not sure how long this one is. Feels like he's almost out all the way. There he is. All right, so there's one more to go. Looks like about 2 inches long. All right, same tool. We're working on the one that's closer to the radiator now. And again, when you get to the point where the ratchet doesn't ratchet anymore, then we can switch to coming in here. I don't think we can get it with our finger. Nope. Come in here with the socket on our finger. Try not to drop it. And then just turn it like that. Hopefully, maybe you guys can't see it. Let's see if we can move the light a little bit better. There we go. Same deal. We'll turn it with the socket until it feels super loose. Then we can take the socket off. Should be able to finish it by hand. It's kind of getting stuck a little bit. There it goes again. This might be the hardest part of the whole job so far, is just lack of access on these 14mm bracket bolts. All right, this one's out. And then we'll take this last one at the top out. And then we'll take the whole bracket out. All right, so now this piece is out. Okay, next up, like the service manual says, it's this top half of the cover. It's held on by a number of 10mm bolts. There's supposed to be some clips that we have to remove here. They look similar to this one. If we zoom in here and take a look at this, but both of these are broken off. One's completely missing and the other's been replaced by a zip tie. So at some point in its life it had that problem. The plastic cover is broken, so you can't actually put the clip here, but the clip could be replaced here. So we may try to source some replacement clips, but that is all we would have had to do on those two. Now if yours are still there, the way I would have gone after these if they had not been damaged, I would have come in with a pair of bent long nose pliers, and if we zoom in here and put a little light on the subject, you can see there's a couple of prongs on the side of these. You would just give them a pinch and wiggle them out like that. But on this one they're broke, so nothing to show. All right, let's go ahead and get our 10mm and start removing the bolts. All right, the harness connector on this guy is threaded onto the back of the bolt. It's a little white nylon piece. So as we get this released, you'll see that it'll release the harness. Like that, right? And then we can pull it the rest of the way out of the captive nut. These are also going to be a different length, so you want to keep track of them as well. We got another one right down here. So other than our broken wiring harness retaining clips, so far the cover looks like it's in good shape. This one's got a lot of debris and stuff, so what I'm going to do before I actually pull it off, I might put this bolt back in. I'm going to get some compressed air and blow the dirt and debris off here because we do not want to have it fall in where the timing chain is. Alright, the third one we're going after is right here on this corner towards the firewall. So near the end here, a little 10mm ratcheting box end wrench can come in handy. It's not a whole lot of clearance. Now this one also has, on the back of the wiring harness, has another one of these little plastic thread-on retainers. You can see right there. So that one's intact. Right, and we're going to go down below and get the others. All right, this other one actually is easier to get at from up here. So it's right below the corner edge of the top cover. And then there's one more right below it, but these are small, shorty kind of bolts. But what I noticed when I was getting this one out is it doesn't look like it still has the one below that. These vehicles get kind of old. They've been around, and sometimes people don't put all the pieces back. So we're short a bolt. That's another thing we'll have to add on our list. But now we should be able to get this cover off. Let's figure out what it's hung up on over here. Looks like maybe our power steering belt. Yep, so our power steering belt is giving us trouble. Let's push that back manually. And then we can get her out. So we can see that this gasket's a little damaged on here, but in fact, I'm not even sure if this is the original gasket or if somebody put RTV on here. It's hard to tell. Yeah, it looks like somebody squirted RTV on here. So they probably damaged the original gasket. Well, remember, this isn't anything that's holding oil or anything. It's just keeping dirt out of there. So that's probably fine. You can see here's our broken connector there. And then we were getting this bolt off, and this is the one that's missing. Alright, so now we have the upper piece. Now we go on to the next step, which if you recall in the service manual is we need to set top dead center. And so for that I'm going to be positioning you guys where you can see right down here. Get the flashlight happy. These are the casting marks for the position of the timing, and we want to get it on 0, and there's going to be a corresponding mark on the crankshaft pulley, and we're going to turn the crankshaft pulley clockwise, always clockwise, until we get lined up. Once we get it lined up, then we'll proceed with that step about removing the belt. Alright, I'm coming in with a 19mm on a breaker bar. And again, we're going to be turning her clockwise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to feel for this mark is, and then I'm going to mark it so you guys can see it more easily. It's right there. Right there. So I'm going to give it a little mark here so that when it comes up, it'll be more obvious to all of us. There we go. And now I'm just going to rotate that until it comes to the 0. And then you'll see that little yellow mark coming up that marks the divot where it needs to be on the 0. It should be coming into view now. That looks like it. Maybe just a hair more. Now if you go past it, you got to go all the way back around again. You don't want to go backwards. All right, so now we've got it at top dead center. At least I think we do. Let me come back up and see the view where the camera is. Yeah, so I'm not happy with that. That's like a little bit past. So I'll probably do this one more time, and I'll show you guys where I landed on that. So I feel I went a little bit past that. So as we do this again and we want to get it right, I also want to show you the camshaft timing. So if we zoom in, you see that little hole the service manual mentioned with the S stamped above it on the camshaft sprocket, the timing sprocket right here, this little hole. You can see there's a little notch cut into that cover that's coming up on there. We want to be able to see that notch through that little hole. Now just to show you where that is in relation to what's going on with the crankshaft pulley, if we go down and look underneath, we can see our yellow mark is just coming into view, and we're about to do the top dead center again. So let's go ahead and keep it on the camshaft this time. So we can find a home for the flashlight. So we'll come back up to the camshaft up here. And then while we turn this guy back to top dead center on the crankshaft again, we'll see if we got this guy lining up. So that little circle's closing up. All right. Now if we go back down and look at the crankshaft, we're on 0 now, which is where we want to be. Again, from the perspective of looking straight down. And if we get a little mirror, we can see that little notch. Hopefully you guys can see that little notch inside the hole there. It's tough to see, but she's there. So that's what we want to make sure is lined up. We want that little notch in the hole, and we want the on the camshaft timing sprocket, and we want the 0 and the notch on the crankshaft pulley lined up. And at that point, we've matched the instructions in the service manual. All right, at this point on the service manual, we were told to loosen this 14 millimeter bolt on this tensioner pulley. And then we were told to put maximum tension on it. So I'm just going to use this little plastic pry tool. See if we can do that. Maybe even use our hand. Let's see. Yeah, I better use our hand. We're just going to put maximum travel on this and then tighten it back up. I'm not going to torque it down or anything. This is just so we can get the belt off. All right, with all that done like that, that should be enough slack to remove the belt from here. Yep. All right, now we just continue with the service manual instructions for taking off the lower cover. That's going to be held on also by 10 millimeter bolts like the top. Okay, so on this one, we've got this kind of like this one harness that's sitting in this clip. Kind of poke him out of there. I'm not going to bother trying to remove him. I just want to take him out. And then we've got another one down below. We have our retainer on the harness, but the cover's broken, so it's not staying on. So we don't have any really way to attach that. Oh well, the car is almost 24 years old. All right, so there's our first 10 right down there that my finger's pointing at. We're going to go after that one, and then we're going to go after this one right here. Right there. We'll go after those two, and then the others will be from the below. All right, now we're grabbing the 10 that's on the left from this view. And then we'll go get the other ones on the other side. This one's being stubborn. Probably either some oxidation or some of that RTV they put on here as a gasket may have gotten on the threads. Makes it hard to take off by hand, but I'll go ahead and pull this one and then I'll show you the others. All right, and then there's one right here in the middle that we'll access from the upper side. I'll go ahead and pull this one out. We'll come back. All right, guys. Next step is going to be to remove the crankshaft pulley. We want to make double sure nothing has moved. So we're going down here and we're seeing that we're still at top dead center. If we zoom all the way down, and we're coming up here. We're looking through our little hole and we're seeing our little timing notch. If we zoom in all the way on that little hole in the mirror, yeah, right there, you can see the shadow of the timing notch right there as I move the mirror. So we're set. All right, we're going to need an impact gun to get this off because we don't want to move it. She's on there, good. All right, yep, we're probably going to have to heat it up. Hasn't been off in so long. Yep, going to have to heat it up. All right, guys, we're just going to try to heat up around the bolt. Try to break the corrosion that's obviously holding it. Don't want to get it too hot because you don't want to damage the rubber and the crankshaft pulley. All right, this bolt is really wedged on there. I suspect it was over-torqued, probably with a pneumatic impact wrench. So what we're going to have to do is step up the beans here. So heat alone's not doing it. So you can see, I'll show you from above in a minute. We got a strap wrench on the pulley because we want to hold it and prevent it from moving counterclockwise as much as possible. With this problem, we're not going to be able to prevent it from not moving at all, but we want to keep it down to just a few millimeters. And then what we got down here, you know, we started off with my old trusty 19 volt Craftsman. These 19.2s are pretty good for most automotive use. Puts out about 300 foot-pounds of torque. But what we're going to do is we're going to step it up to this 18 Milwaukee. This guy does close to 1,500 foot-pounds of reverse torque. So that's going to overcome this. And then we'll go over up on the top here. I'll show you on the top what we've got with the strap wrench. It's going to be a two-man job at this point. Now we're still sitting at TDC down there with our yellow mark and our 0. And we just want to maintain that. And we're going to use the strap wrench to secure this. Now it's probably going to walk backwards in the wrong direction to around 5. And what we're going to do is we're going to monitor this as we try to use the impact wrench. As it walks back to the 5, we'll just stop, reposition it, and continue on. So hopefully this is going to do it. I'm not going to narrate this next section because I'm going to need my camera person to hold this while I do this tool. But we'll set the camera up here remote down below so you can see. All right, guys, sometimes you just need more beans. So if we take a look at this bolt, there's no corrosion really on here. And there's actually no Loctite either. What I thought might have happened is I thought somebody may have incorrectly used Loctite. You do not use Loctite on the crankshaft bolt for this particular engine. That's something you not required to do from the service manual. So I think what it is was just over-torqued, probably put in with a pneumatic wrench. So anyway, we've got it out. So the next thing we got to do is we've got to get the pulley off. And if you notice the pulley, there's a couple of threaded holes here and here. And that's intended for a special service tool. But just about any generic tool will work too. I have this generic tool I use a lot for these kind of jobs, although this is primarily meant to be used on General Motors vehicles. But it's the same kind of deal, right? You'll have something like this. You'll have something like this that goes in. You'll have a pusher that goes on the end of this. There's 3 different ones in this particular kit. I think for this shape crankshaft snout, I'm going to use this one, right? So something like this. And then you take a pair of these bolts and some washers, and you'd line them up wherever they would fit. In this case, it's going to be on these 2 here. I don't have a bolt in this kit that fits. I had to go rummaging around. Basically, what I found that this takes is, if we go get a tool that measures bolts and things, what this ends up being is an M6 by 1. Right, so an M6 by 1 fits in this tool just nicely. And if we take this bolt, put it in these threaded holes, it goes in just fine. Now this is a carriage bolt. This is not my first choice because I don't got any way to really tighten it except by hand. But rather than running up to the store just for a couple of bolts, I think this will do. So what we'll do to effect this is we'll take a couple of washers from the kit on this carriage bolt, like so. Fortunately, we found 2 of them. I keep all kinds of spare bolts because you never know when something like this will pop up and it'll save you a trip, allow you to keep going with the job. And we're just going to kind of thread this in by hand to start. And basically the idea is that the threads of the bolt grab the pulley, and then as you push up on the crankshaft snout, it'll push up against this. Now I can tell right now that these washers, because of the size of this bolt, they're not going to be sufficient, right? Because they're not grabbing enough. So I'm going to have to probably rummage around and find some larger washers. So let me go do that. But you get the gist of what it is. Let me get this set up. Put some larger washers under here. We'll thread this all the way down. And then we'll take a 14mm socket and we'll start cranking down on this. This will pull the pulley off. All right, with some sufficiently wide enough washers, we're just going to bear down on this guy. And fortunately, there's not as much, rotational torsion, so you don't have to worry about a tool like this causing the crankshaft to turn. Keep an eye on it just in case, though. But it should just work this off. And it feels loose right there. So these carriage bolts did the trick. As long as you get enough thread, anything will do. Just got to be long enough to go all the way into the threaded part of the crankshaft pulley, yet not stick out so far that the tool is going to run up against the car body when you're trying to get it. So you can see we've got this kind of pulled out here. Now this guy's keyed. Should be able to wiggle it off the rest of the way, right? So there's the mark we've been looking at. There's our keyway, so it can only go back on one way, and so we don't have to worry about this coming out of alignment now because we checked it before we did this process. And then we've got one more 10mm here, and then we can take the bottom cover off. So let me go get this stuff out of the way with the puller, and let's go do that. All right, hopefully this is the last one of these. All of these fasteners are over-torqued. Fortunately, we've been lucky. Nothing broke off. Could you imagine what a shitty day disaster it would be if something like this broke off? Bolt like that broke off? All right. I think we got all these fasteners above, but... Yep. So there's this guy. So there's the markings that we were looking at that were cast in there. There's a couple other cast marks that we're going to need later. One of them's right here. I should say not a casting mark, but molded into the plastic. So this guy here is okay. He's not missing any of his bolts, but he is also missing one of the tabs that holds the electrical connection, just like the top piece. So this one's about ready to go too, right? So definitely feel like taking a trip to the salvage yard and fixing this up. Also, once again, this is not the original. Doesn't look like the original gasket. It really looks like somebody just squirted RTV on here. But it'll do, because all this is to keep dust and debris out of here. Now there's a lot of dust and debris down here and oil staining, so we're going to want to pay attention to that. But for now, we've got this out, and the next thing we're going to take out is the belt kind of fell off. There's this little guide here. It also fits on the keyway. It would normally stay on the keyway if the belt was there. It goes past it if the belt's off. I'm going to take this guy off too. And then, you know, just looking at our belt here, even though she's past due, she doesn't have any obvious, I guess I take that back, right? So she's cracking. There's several places where she's cracking. So this was, you know, a problem waiting to happen, which is why, you know, if you zoom in here, you can see if we bend this belt, this cracking, this is what would eventually cause you to lose the engine if this broke on you while you were driving, right? So this is why you have scheduled maintenance to replace something like this. Anyway, just flipping it around, it fell out. All right, so now we've just got two more things and we'll be done with disassembly, and that's the two idler pulleys. So let's go grab those and then we're all done with disassembly. All right, so let's get the idler pulley first. We're going to loosen this up so we can get the tension off the spring with a 14 millimeter, just like we did when we started. And then I'm going to take a hook and I'm going to fish the spring off of this. And I'm just going to hold on to it so it doesn't drop while we take the bolt off by hand. And we'll take the whole tensioner pulley assembly off. So you just want to take note of how this attaches, right? So if you lose this spring, it goes in like that with the hook end facing away from the pulley. All right, so this is another thing that we needed to inspect. If you remember from the service manual, we can tell it's not corroded. It is dirty. We'll clean it up in the parts washer, but we can still see the plating on it, so it's not corroded. So as long as it measures out okay, it's reusable. And then we're going to check the seal. I don't see any sign of damage on the seal on the front. We'll have to kind of peek in here after we give this guy a squirt of some cleaner too to see if there's any on the back. There's no binding. There's no scoring or damage to the surface. So initial check, I would say this is completely reusable. Let me put this aside, then we'll go after the next one. All right, same 14. This pulley down here. This is our last guy to remove. And once again, we get an over-torqued fastener. Oh, man. How did they get that so torqued? All right, going to have to get a cheater bar to get that one off. Let me go get that. Actually, we'll try a breaker bar first. See if this gives us enough leverage to break the torque on this guy. Yep. Definitely over-torqued. I don't know what it is with people, you know, some shops understand what a torque wrench is, and some don't. All they know how to do is use an impact wrench. But, you know, it's the stuff you have to deal with. Part of what I try to do when I do these repairs for folks, I mean, this isn't my vehicle, but, you know, I try to get stuff all back to OEM, and we try to make sure everything is factory torqued. None of this Guten tight stuff unless we have to. All right, I have to block your view for a sec. She's coming out okay. And just don't drop it, because that would create scoring on this smooth surface. And you don't want any scoring on here because that can cause nicks and tears in the belt. So again, I don't see any problem with the internal bearings. No vibration, spins fine. Really don't see any damage to the seal, but again, we're going to clean this up and we'll give it a closer inspection. But at this point, we've completed disassembly. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in here and see what we need to clean, right? A lot of this we can probably just compress air We also want to check this water pump over here, make sure it's not leaking, which I can tell right now it's not. Down below we've got a drive on the oil pump. We'll make sure that's not leaking. You know, now that you got all this stuff out of the way, it's a good time to inspect and see if anything else has got a problem. Now this vehicle has had some oil leaks in the past. I know I fixed at least one of them on a previous video with the camshaft cover. So we'll try to get some of this crud off of here too from these previous leaks, but she's otherwise looking pretty good. So we'll do a light cleaning and then we'll start reassembly. All right, so we cleaned up this idler pulley and she spins nice and smooth, and we don't see any leakage coming from this seal. And you can tell this is the original one, made in Japan by NSK. So we're going to go ahead and reuse this one. We're just going to put it back on and torque the bolt down to spec. However, after cleaning up the other one, that's not going to be possible. I'll show you the spring came out nice. Dampener's in there, but it's all dried up. And the other problem with the spring is if we think about the spec that we had in the service manual, this guy has to be no more than 42 millimeters. He's 45, so he's stretched, so he has to be replaced. So this guy has to be replaced. And then we take a look at this pulley. It spins. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's like a sound in there, like a friction sound. You can feel it. That's what's important. So I think what's happened on this one is, if you take a close look around the seal edge, if I spin this a few times, what we can see is lubricant. We zoom in right here under Koyo, which is the manufacturer, OEM manufacturer to this part to Toyota. You can see that we have lubricant coming out from the seal. And it's really hard to see on the back side, but it's worse on the back. So the problem we've got here is this part has failed and is also going to have to be replaced. So we're going to have to go track these parts down, genuine OEM, and we'll go get those, and when we get them, we'll come back and finish the video. All right, we got our parts now, and we just finished up in the previous part the inspection piece, and we had taken a look at the spring, and we checked the free length, and we had noticed that it didn't meet the specification of 42 millimeters. And if it's not 42 millimeters, you got to replace it. We had almost 46, so we replaced that. We also checked both of our pulleys. One was okay, but the other one made a sound and did not turn smoothly. It turned, but it didn't turn without noise and a vibration inside, so we had to replace it as well. So those were the parts we had to wait on. So now we're going to get to installation. Now remember, like I said earlier, the service manual is going to talk about steps that you don't necessarily have to do, because we didn't do this. They talk about all kinds of things you can install, but pertaining to this service, we're going to jump right back down to the idler pulley. So that number 2 idler pulley that we're reusing, we're going to go put that guy back on, and we're going to torque him to 42 Newton meters or 31 foot-pounds. If you get the bolts mixed up, they're giving you a hint here that it's the long bolt. And then we're going to temporarily install the number 1 pulley and the tension spring. We're going to put this into a position where it's fully released on the tension so we can install the belt. Now we're not going to torque anything, we're just going to snug it up. So we're going to get all that assembly put on as well. This one they're giving you the hint that it's the 42 millimeter long bolt. So 35 millimeter and a 42 millimeter, so you can tell them apart. They're talking about, you know, pulling this down so you can get the right release of the tension, which is what I just mentioned. And then they're going to have us put the belt on. So we should already have our marks still installed. Now what they're telling you is, with the crankshaft pulley off, there's still another way to double check that you're at top dead center here, and I'm going to show you that as well. There's a casting mark into the actual engine here and another little mark on this sprocket, and you can check that as well just in case something moved. But we're going to go ahead and run the belt on, get it into position. We're going to make sure everything's lined up. You guys can read this if you find it interesting, but I'm going to show you all this, and then we're going to get the number 1 timing belt cover installed and get the 10 millimeter bolts that secure it all torqued down, which is what they're talking about over here. And are they mentioning this torquing? They're showing this, but they're not mentioning the torque. But I think we already have that torque on our diagram earlier, which should be right here. And you know what? These particular fasteners do not have a specified torque, so they're just going to get snugged up. No torque associated with the timing cover mounting bolts, so they just get good and tight. All right, let's go ahead and get that set up so we can go ahead and start the next part of the procedure, which is after we get the belt on, we're going to have to go through another check of the timing alignment before we can finish the reassembly. All right, let me show you that backup timing mark down here on the crankshaft sprocket. So we're going to zoom in here. And right here on the aluminum, where I've got this pick pointing, that little notch there, that's what's cast into the engine. And then right here is between these two teeth is the little notch that's cut into the sprocket itself. And so that's your backup alignment mark. That's how you can align this if you don't have the pulley installed, right there. All right, so let's get going on that number 2 idler. All right, let's get this number 2 in here. I'm going to suggest you use 2 hands because you don't want to drop this guy and end up getting nicks onto this polished surface of the pulley. Just going to start it by hand. And then we're just going to come in here, whatever tool you want to use. I'm going to use a 14mm ratcheting box end wrench. All right, we got that guy snug, and we'll come in here and we'll torque him up to 31 foot-pounds. All right, we got this guy to 31 foot-pounds. It's a cramp quarter, so I used a 14mm crowfoot to get in here. A smaller socket would work as well. All right, so now let's replace this guy. 13505 rather, 7411 is the genuine Toyota part for this idler pulley. And what we got here now is this guy spins like glass. No feeling of friction and no noise at all. And then we're going to couple that with a new spring, which is a 9507 17003. So we can pop this package open here with our pick. And we got a damper in there that's nice and firm and not rattling around like the old dried out one. Remember, when we mount this guy, he's going to go like that. All right, so we're going to get him in position. Let me go get the bolt, move the camera around, and we'll get this guy installed. All right, let's get this guy in. There's a hole here. There's a dowel here. So you're going to want to get this guy worked onto that little dowel pin. And we're going to get our bolt in. And again, we're going to hold on to it because we don't want it getting dropped and getting scratched or scored. All right, then we're going to come in here with this spring in that position. And we're going to pull this guy up, slip him on to his little perch there. All right, and then we're going to grab our little box end wrench. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to push this guy down so he's not got any tension on him and snug him up. That's all that we need to do for now. Just to hold him there. All right, now let's go get the belt. All right, our timing belt's going to be a Toyota 13568 09041. You'll get the belt inside, and you'll also get a new maintenance sticker to go on top of the upper timing cover, just like we saw at the beginning of the video with the original. So keep that over here for now. Right, so you'll have the part numbers and the Toyota mark printed right on it. I like to put these on where I can read the writing while facing the front of the engine here from this direction. So let's go ahead and get this guy routed. All right, guys. It's easier just to get this on and to show you how it goes than to try to film while it's going on. So we've got the belt wrapped around the bottom of the crankshaft and the oil pump. At this point, we can put this guy back on where he's keyed on. All right. And then we're going to go up on top, and I'll show you where the routing goes before. Now, before you put this guy on, you can use your mirror to check those 2 marks I showed you earlier to make sure you didn't accidentally move this. Remember, if you do move it, you got to go in the clockwise direction to correct it. Do not go in the counterclockwise direction to correct it. But we're good here, so let's go up on top. All right, so here's our view up on top. So we're coming up from around the crankshaft, smooth in to the smooth side of the number 2 idler pulley, up over the water pump, up over the camshaft sprocket, smooth side to the idler, and then back down to the oil pump. That's the routing. And then if we take our flashlight and get it situated with a little mirror here, I'll show you how you can double check that you haven't moved the camshaft piece. If we can just find out where that mirror went. There he is. Okay. And so we'll come down here and we'll look in our little hole there. And if I don't get too much light, you can see that little divot in there. That's the notch. If we zoom in. And that's how we know. Maybe there's a little bit too much of this flashlight here, but hopefully that's coming through for you guys. Let's zoom in a little bit more. There he is, right there. All right, so we're all in alignment. So now let's go put the bottom timing cover on and then do the alignment check in the service manual. All right, here's a shot out of the Toyota parts manual for this particular engine and the year that the video covers. And here's the number 1 timing cover, and here's the number 2 timing cover. This guy back here is the number 3 cover. You can see there's a series of gaskets that go on here that we talked about earlier. This part here goes on the number 1, and then there's 2 that go on the number 2. There's some other parts in here like a plug and stuff like that. But that's the first thing. And the second thing is these bolts. There's 4 long and 4 short. And so these positions here, the number 2s are the long ones. I'll flash this up inside the video as a blow up too. So on the number 2, we've got two long ones here and a long one here and a short one there. And then we got another long one here and 2 short ones there. So that's the layout. And then in the very middle, there's another short one on the number 1. So as we go look at putting this number 1 back on, the little tabs that would retain the crankshaft sensor are broken off. And that's kind of an important thing to have because we don't want that sensor getting sucked up into the belts. So that necessitates replacing this. And a lot of times these can crack in other places too, but this is normally something cosmetic, but because of that harness, we need to fix this. So we tried to get one from the salvage yard. We did get an upper one. I'll show you the number 2 in a minute. We paid, I think, $7 for it. But I elected to get the owner a new one for the number 1, and that's a part number 11302 74040. And the gasket that goes with this guy is 11328 74060. So it's just a self-adhesive. You can see there's a white strip. We're going to peel that off, and we're going to run it all the way around, and then we're going to get this guy installed. Remember, there's no torque value on these bolts, so we're just going to snug them up. All right, guys, just a little quick shot of running this gasket into place, right? You just want to pull the adhesive strip off as you go. Follow the contours of where this guy's supposed to sit for his home. I figured I'd show you this piece up here because there's like a vent hole, or a drain hole, I should say. So when this guy runs across here, right, he's going to have a gap there, and that's intentional. So I'm going to keep running this on, and we'll come back when we're ready to install it. All right, and then when you get to the end, if we zoom in here, you'll have just about an inch left. In some cases, it'll vary. They give you just a little bit extra. It's going to sit flush down here, so that's why you'll end up with that little piece. Just snip it off before you install it. All right, just as I put this on here, just a shot in the front to highlight something. So you're familiar with these timing marks because we were using the 0 for the top dead center. We're also going to need to take note of these marks. There's a couple other marks in here, but this is the one we care about. This is going to end up being the 45. So part of the next procedure is we're going to have to line the crankshaft pulleys mark up with this guy. All right, and just to show you the relative tightness on these, since there's no torque value, just ratchet them down. And then once they start getting tight, because remember, this is plastic, one finger until it's too tight to turn with one finger. You're done. Good and tight. All right, next we're going to put the pulley back on. We're just taking a rag with some penetrating oil just to get off any surface corrosion that might have accumulated. Since we had to go get parts, everything sat for about a week, as you can see from the surface corrosion on the brake rotor. So if you happen to get anything on there, even though these things are stored inside the shop versus the rotor, it's a good idea to just kind of wipe everything off to make sure that you don't have anything. All right, let's get this guy. There's a notch, a keyway. You can get that back on. And again, you want to make every effort not to move it. And it should slide just like it did if you clean it off. And we're not going to try to tighten this down too far because that's going to make it turn. We just want to pull it in and get the pulley seated. So let's go ahead and get that seated. I'd recommend a strap wrench around this because even as you try to seat this, you don't want it to turn and mess everything up. So let's go ahead and get this seated, then I'll show you the service manual check procedure before we button up the number 2 cover. All right, we got that number 1 cover on and we put the pulley on. Right? They talk about getting this lined up. When the time comes, we're going to torque it to 80 foot-pounds, but not yet. We're going to come back to that. Right now, we just wanted everything sitting in nice and snug. They have some other things they tell you how to do that aren't related to this procedure. We already are at top dead center here. And if you're not, you know what to do. Now over here, they're going to tell us, they're trying to make sure this is all lined up. We know ours is already lined up. We've already connected everything up. They're talking about if you're reusing a belt. Well, obviously, this doesn't apply to us because we're not reusing a belt. We're at the point where we want to check the timing. So we're going to loosen the number 1 idler pump pulley a half a turn. And then we're going to slowly turn the crankshaft 2 revolutions TDC to TDC. That means 0 to 0 once, 0 to 0 twice. Right? Clockwise. Always turn the crankshaft pulley clockwise. So we're going to turn those 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure 2 things happen. It stays on 0. This notch stays lined up with 0. And I'm going to pop up on top here. I'm going to make sure that our little notch is staying in the little circle, the little hole here. If it's not, we're going to have to take the belt off and readjust this because something went wrong, obviously. But this is the step that we're going to go do. So after we do these 2 times, 0 to 0 once, 0 to 0 twice, each time we're going to check both that we're getting everything lined up. Then we're going to go 1 7/8 and stop at that 45-degree mark, right? So they're showing you this mark in this drawing. It's really, not the way as you saw. It's cast into the plastic, or it's molded into the plastic of the number 1 timing cover. We're going to turn it 0, right? So we're going to turn it to 0, 1 time to 0, and then 7/8, 0 to 45. So 1 and then 7/8. We're going to check these things again, and then we're done. When that's done, we're going to torque the idler pulley to 31 foot-pounds as well, and we're going to install the number 2 timing belt cover, and I'll go over putting those gaskets on, and then we'll do that. All right, so you guys can see we're on TDC again, and we don't have to worry about torquing that crankshaft bolt yet because as we do this next step of turning it, it's going to tighten it up. But we do want to make sure that we've got this guy. And then again, just like we've been doing, we want to check our little circle. And hopefully you guys can see there's our little notch in there if we zoom in. At least I can see him really good. I hope it's coming out for you on the film. Right there. Perfect. All right, so we're all lined up. So let's turn it around 2 times like it said in the service manual. And let's make sure it stays. And by the way, in case I didn't spell it out when we were on the service manual, you loosen the timing idler, the tensioner, 1/2 turn in order to let it take up the slack before you start this. All right, this is our first TDC to TDC turn. Coming up on the first one. All right, so that's 1. Now we're going to start 2. All right, coming up. And what you can do is you can kind of pause right here, let any compression in the cylinders dissipate, so you've got more fine control. This will be our second TDC to TDC. And so what we're going to want to do now is we're going to go grab our mirror again and make sure we're still good to go on our camshaft. And we are. There is our notch. Perfect and dead center. So now we're going to go one more. All right, we're coming up on the 1, TDC to TDC. All right, so that's the 1, and now we're going to do the 7/8. Let me show you where we're going to stop for that so you know what to be watching for. So remember we showed this mark on this number 1 cover. It's right. Yeah. Flashlight took a dive on us. It's right there where my finger is. I'm going to go put a little mark of yellow paint. Let me go grab a little paint mark. We'll put on there and we'll come back. All right, so we did our 1-to-1. If we zoom in here to the end of the screwdriver, we marked a little bit of yellow paint on this molded 45-degree mark on the timing cover. So that's what we're going to do for our 7/8. So around we go again, but not all the way this time. Okay, here we're coming up. Here I'm going to pause a little bit to let any compression subside, because I don't want to pass it. There we go. And now we're going to torque the idler pulley down. I'm just going to come up here and snug it up for now to 31 foot-pounds. Come in here with a torque wrench, we'll torque that guy up, and we're ready to put the number 2 cover on. All right, back to our parts picture, right? So part 11304, that's our number 2 cover. And I said we managed to pick up a nice one from the salvage yard with intact tabs, so we didn't have to buy a new one for that. But if you're interested in the new one, I'll roll that part number in the description. And so similar we showed before, right? We have our 2 long bolts at the top. Remember, they're going to go into the wiring harness retainers that are kind of a neutral color that they thread onto. And then the last long one is going to go in this corner here, and the short one is going to go in this position here. And as far as the 2 gaskets, the upper gasket is going to be an 11329 74080. And then this small gasket at the bottom is an 11319 74030. All right, guys, just a quick view of these number 2 cover gaskets and how they go on. This is the long one around here, then here's the short one like this. So I'm going to go ahead and get this installed, get these 10 millimeters snugged down, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, guys, we're going to secure this harness. Now, these aren't serviced separately, these clips, but I'm going to show you what I used to get that factory look and get them back the way they originally were. These aren't serviced either, but we got those 2, and then up here is something that's serviced, this little clip here, and I'll put that part number down in the description. That fits around the sensor right there, and that one goes right in there. So you're pushing these in, just give them a little bit of some support in the back so they don't break. And then this guy was the only one that we had from the original ones that was still intact. Slack him in there, and now we're done with that. So we got all these guys snugged up, we got this cover on, we got this secured. I'm just going to show you what I used to get this factory look back, and then we'll move on to getting these brackets and other things reinstalled. All right, so to make these little harness retainers that are going to look factory, that hold that crankshaft sensor, They don't service them at Toyota. They come with the wiring harness. But there's some other kinds that are serviced, and there are knockoffs that you can get made in China like this one. These are meant to be used on the chassis, but they're the exact same 7mm by 12mm type attachment. So what we need to do is we just need to get some of these, and we just need to clip off this outer plastic. This is all I did. Right? And I'll pretty it up later. Right? And just go ahead and clip that out of the way because it's not going to fit around the timing cover without that removed. And then it fits perfect. And then you'll run it in like this. Right? And you get it on the harness and get it the way you want. And you're going to get it nice and loose, clip off the tail before you're done. I mean, after you get it tightened, and then you can snap it in. All right, guys, home stretch. We're just about done. All right, so here's our torque for our engine moving control rod. They show 3 here, but there's 4 bolts, 47 foot-pounds. Next to be to install the power steering drive belt. There's 2 bolts there, the adjuster belt and the pivot belt. Excuse me, the adjuster bolt and the pivot bolt. Now those guys are going to get torqued to 32 foot-pounds, right? There's this guy and this guy, right? So that's the power steering vane pump bolts. And then after that, we got to put the alternator back on. And the alternator, what we're going to have with that is the pivot bolt, which is the 14 millimeter, is going to be 38 foot-pounds, and the 12 millimeter adjusting lock bolt is going to be 13, right? So the adjusting lock bolt's on the other side of the adjusting bolt, and the pivot bolt's here. So with that in place, we'll be able to get the belt on, get the alternator torqued down, get the belt on, get the power steering pump torqued down, and then we'll be ready to do the torque on the crankshaft bolt. And if you don't remember what that was earlier on in this section where they showed you down here 80 foot-pounds. So the crankshaft bolt gets torqued to 80 foot-pounds. We'll need to use a special tool for that. I'll show you that, a strap wrench. Once all that's in place, we hook up the battery, put the wheel back on, put the inner apron back on behind the wheel. There's no torque value on those two, 10 millimeters, and we'll be ready to start it up. All right, underneath this guy, we've got our main mount. Each of those 3 14s is going to go back into 38 foot-pounds. Now we got this guy on. We haven't torqued him yet because we got to get this installed. This torsion mount here we showed is cracking. So the rubber's shot, so this needs to be replaced. These are different between automatic and manuals. The current part number for the automatic on this engine is a 12363 74130. So we're going to work this guy in here. And we're going to get our bolts situated back inside here. And after everything is started, then we'll go ahead and torque these up. And I'll give you that torque value in just a moment. All right, when you get all these ready to go, all 4 of these 14s go to 47 foot-pounds. This one, this one, this one, and this one. At this point, we can reconnect these ground cables, right? Remember, one ran above and one ran below. So we're just going to go ahead and connect those, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, next candidate is the power steering belt. If you remember, the old aftermarket one was cracked and needed to be replaced. We're in here. We're going to replace it with a 99363 30750 genuine OEM Toyota part. All right, now when we're putting this power steering belt back on, we're going to need a pry bar so we can pull it taut. And then we're going to need a 12 millimeter to come up on this bolt and tighten it. We had this guy really loose. Probably too loose. So what we're looking for here is we're going to probably want to make it a little bit more tighter than that. You don't want it too tight. You put too much stress on it. We want to have probably that much flex. Right now we've got too much, that much flex. I'm going to loosen it up, retighten it, then I'll show you how to get the bolt on top. All right, with the power steering out of the way, it's time to do the alternator. So the first thing we're going to do here, there's this little bushing that's in here. Sometimes this thing can stick out and make it a little bit easier if we get flush to get it back in. Just like that. Just using a brass hammer so we don't dent anything, and that'll allow us to get the alternator back in easily. All right, so with that out of the way, it goes in nice and easy here, so we can get this pivot bolt reinstalled. those threads started. And then we'll come over here with the adjuster. And we'll get this guy started. All right, so we'll get this stuff snug down, and then we'll get our belt in place, and then we'll button it all up. All right, to tighten this guy up to the 80 foot-pounds, we want to put our 19 on here with a torque wrench. We want to hold this crankshaft pulley with a strap wrench so that we can actually get the torque done. You won't be able to do it with the belts on. It's still going to turn the engine, right? It's just too much torque. So the strap wrench is wrapped around here, and if we pan up on top, you can see we have a tool like this in this position, and you're going to need two hands. Somebody will turn the torque wrench, and somebody also hold this tool, and that's how you do the torquing. All right, so remember also we needed to put in a new alternator air conditioning belt. That's going to be a Toyota 980 91122-83. This is for vehicles that have both air conditioning and an alternator. If you don't have air conditioning, it's a different part number. I'll put both in the description below. All right, with a 12 millimeter, we're going to tighten up the slack on the belt. Remember, similar to the power steering belt, we don't want it too tight. It's going to put strain on the belt. We want to have some play, just like that, just like you see my fingers moving down there. At this point, we can go ahead and torque the pivot bolt and the other 12 millimeter bolt that holds it to the block of the adjuster. All right, we've got everything torqued up. It's 38 foot-pounds on the pivot. It's 13 on the adjust lock nut here. This one, of course, you leave alone because it's what you adjusted to. There's no torque on this bolt here, this nut rather, so it's another one that you just do snug and tight. If you guys remember, the plastic cap that goes on here on ours was broken. We're going to replace that too. It's a Toyota 82823-08010. This was a really tough part to locate that the dealership said doesn't exist, but Toyota makes everything. All right, so the way this works is you see there's two tabs here and two tabs here and then a retainer here. These guys have to snap on. Normally when you take this off, if it's not all brittle, you can put a screwdriver in here and flex this, right? And it's supposed to be nice and flexible so it'll pop off of here. When they get old, they get very brittle and they snap and break when you try to remove them. All right, we're ready to hook the battery back up and put the wheel apron cover back on. I'll show you the torque on that if there is one. I don't think there is. And get the wheel. All right, everything's buttoned up. We got everything double checked. We've got our battery reconnected. The last couple of things we got to do is we're going to throw on this maintenance sticker that came with our new timing chain, and we're going to record what our mileage and the date is that we've done this service to keep track of it. So if you remember, we replaced this top cover so we didn't have to remove the original one. We're just going to put this guy on there. We've already cleaned it off, and we'll write that on there. And now we're going to give it a start. So let me get set up and we'll show you giving it a start. All right, guys, here goes. All right, no check engine light. Started right up. Looks and sounds nice and smooth. So I think we're good to go. We'll go ahead and give it a test drive just to make sure, but I think this maintenance job is done. If you guys got any questions about how to do this or any comments about what we did, go ahead and leave it below. I'll try to help. If you found this video useful, help save you some time, show you how to do this the factory way, appreciate hitting that thumbs up, paying it forward. As always, thanks for watching.